The doctor looked at me and said, "Congratulations. You're going to be a father." My wife held my hand and smiled. But there was one problem. I had a vasectomy 4 years ago. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and clean cotton. Grant Whitaker sat in a plastic chair beside the narrow examination table, his large hands resting flat on his knees. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly. He had been in rooms like this before. Rooms where you waited for news. Rooms where you kept your face steady no matter what came next. Camille sat on the edge of the table, smoothing the paper sheet beneath her. She wore a pale green blouse and had her dark hair pinned back the way she always did when she wanted to look put together. Her eyes moved to the door each time a sound passed in the hallway. Grant watched her without looking like he was watching. That was something he had learned over years of running a business. You could observe a room without drawing attention to yourself. You could take in every detail, the tightness around someone's mouth, the extra blink, the breath held a half-second too long, and file it away before anyone knew you were paying attention. Dr. Harlan Foster came in carrying a manila folder. He was a man in his mid-50s, silver at his temples, with the kind of unhurried manner that came from decades of delivering news. Good news, difficult news, news that changed a person's life in the space of a sentence. He sat on his rolling stool and opened the folder. He smiled. "Well," he said, "congratulations are in order. Mrs. Whitaker, you're pregnant. About 8 weeks along." Camille gasped. It was the kind of gasp that sounded practiced, sharp and bright like a sound she had been holding in a drawer waiting to use. She reached across and grabbed Grant's hand. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Grant." Grant looked at her. Her smile was wide. Her eyes were wet at the corners. Everything about her face said joy. But Grant's stomach had already dropped through the floor. He held her hand. He squeezed it once. He turned to Dr. Foster and asked 2 questions about timeline and vitamins, because asking questions was what a man did in a moment like this. It kept his face busy. It kept his voice steady. But inside, something had already locked into place. 4 years earlier, Grant had sat in a different clinic, a smaller, quieter one on the east side of Denver. He had gone alone because Camille had made it clear from the beginning that she never wanted children. She had said it plainly, without apology, on their 3rd date. She said it again before they got engaged. She was consistent. She was certain, and Grant had respected that. He had undergone a vasectomy at 37. The procedure took less than an hour. He had followed up 3 months later with a fertility confirmation test. The doctor had shown him the results. 0 sperm count. The procedure had worked. That was 4 years ago. Now, Dr. Foster was telling him his wife was 8 weeks pregnant. Grant kept his face polite and composed the entire drive home. He opened the car door for Camille. He listened to her talk about due dates and nursery colors. He nodded in the right places. He said, "Yeah, and of course, and we'll figure it out." But the entire time, one thought sat in the center of his mind like a stone dropped in still water. "This baby is not mine." He didn't say it. He didn't let it show. He had learned long ago that reacting too quickly was the fastest way to lose ground. You didn't fire the bullet the moment you saw the target. You took your time. You made sure of your aim. That night, after Camille fell asleep, Grant sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't pour a drink. He just sat there, thinking carefully the way his father had taught him. Figure out what's true before you decide what to do. Grant met Camille 8 years ago at a friend's birthday gathering in Aurora. He was 33 and exhausted in the way that only came from years of working before sunrise and after midnight. He had started his HVAC company, Whitaker Climate Solutions, out of a rented garage with 1 van, 1 apprentice, and enough credit card debt to keep him awake most nights. The first 2 years nearly broke him. The 3rd year, he broke even. By year 5, he had 8 employees and a contract with a property management company that covered 300 residential units. He was not yet wealthy at the birthday party where he met Camille, but he was on his way, and something in his posture told people that. Camille noticed him first. She came over with a glass of white wine and a confidence that he found immediately interesting. She was 29, dark-eyed, quick with a smile, and she worked at a clothing boutique in Cherry Creek that catered to women with money and taste. She dressed well, she spoke well, and she told Grant within the first 20 minutes that she found ambition more attractive than almost anything else. He had liked that. He had liked her. They dated for a year and a half before he proposed. They married in a small ceremony at a mountain venue outside Boulder. 40 guests. A rented tent. Camille had wanted something bigger, but Grant's money was still tied up in the business, and she had said she understood. Back then, she said a lot of things. She said she loved that he was grounded. She said she admired that he worked hard without bragging. She said she didn't need a fancy life. She just needed a good one. The first few years of marriage were not bad. They were busy. Grant worked long hours. Camille managed the boutique, picked up extra shifts, and seemed genuinely content with what they had. They took one vacation a year. They had dinner with friends on weekends. They argued occasionally about small things, a forgotten appointment, a cold response to a warm gesture, but nothing that cracked the foundation. Then the business grew. The property management contract led to a commercial partnership. The commercial partnership led to a municipal bid. Grant won the bid. He hired 12 more employees. The van became a fleet. The rented garage became a proper office with a reception desk and a company name on the door in clean block letters. They moved to the house near Pinewood Lake 2 years into the boom. It was a 4-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and a deck overlooking the water. Grant paid cash for a third of it and financed the rest responsibly. He was proud of it in the quiet way. He was proud of everything. Not loudly, not with performance, but in the way he sometimes stood at the kitchen window in the morning and felt something settle in his chest. That was when Camille changed. He couldn't point to a single moment. It happened the way erosion happened, slowly, invisibly, until the ground looked different and you couldn't quite explain when it shifted. Camille stopped working within 3 months of the move. She said the commute to the boutique was too far. Grant didn't push back. The money was good. If she wanted to take a break, that was fine. But the break became permanent. And as the months passed, the conversations changed. She started asking about the business in a different way. Not curious questions, practical ones. How much did the commercial contracts bring in per quarter? What was the company valued at? What would happen to the assets if the business were sold? Grant answered honestly the first few times. Then he started noticing the pattern. She began talking about real estate investments, about which neighborhoods in Denver were appreciating fastest, about the return on short-term rentals. She watched finance content on her tablet late at night. She started spending time with a group of women in the area whose husbands all had significant assets and whose conversations, from what Grant could tell, were largely about how to protect and expand those assets. He told himself this was normal. People grew. Interests changed. Maybe she was just educating herself. But the warmth between them was cooling. Not dramatically, not the way it cooled in movies with shouting and broken things. It cooled the way a room cooled when a window was left open in winter. Slowly, steadily, until one day you realized you were cold, and you couldn't remember exactly when the chill had started. She spent more time on her phone. She went out more, lunches with friends, evening events, errands that seemed to stretch longer than the task required. When Grant asked about her day, the answers were vague. Pleasant enough, but thin. He didn't confront it. That wasn't his nature. But he noticed. He had always noticed. 2 days after the appointment with Dr. Foster, Grant drove to Denver. He told Camille he had a supplier meeting in the city. She didn't ask which supplier or what time he'd be back. She was on her phone when he left, sitting at the kitchen island in a robe, coffee going cold beside her. The clinic he chose was in a quiet part of Capitol Hill. He had found it through a search he made on his phone with the location services turned off. He paid for parking in cash. He wore a baseball cap and a plain jacket he rarely used. It wasn't that he was afraid. He just didn't want to trail. The nurse at the front desk asked him to fill out a form. He used his real name. There was no point in lying, but he paid a lab fee in cash and asked for results to be delivered by secure email to an account he created that morning. Of course, the nurse said. She was professional. She didn't ask why. The test itself took minutes. A sample, a label, A nod from the technician. Grant drove back to Cedar Ridge without turning on the radio. He ate dinner with Camille that evening and watched her scroll through a home design website, showing him photos of nursery furniture. He said the right things. He asked about colors. He watched her face while she talked and let himself see what was really there. She looked comfortable. That was the word for it. Not guilty, not nervous. Comfortable. Like a woman who had made a plan and was watching it proceed exactly as expected. The results came back the next morning at 6:42. Grant was already awake. He had slept 3 hours, maybe 4. He sat at his desk in the small home office at the back of the house, the door closed, the desk lamp on. He opened the email. He read the report. He read it a second time. The physician's summary was clear and direct. Mr. Whitaker, based on the sample analysis, you present with azoospermia consistent with a successful vasectomy. There is no evidence of sperm production. The procedure performed 4 years prior remains effective. Grant set the phone face down on the desk. He placed both hands flat on the wooden surface. He breathed in slowly through his nose. He was not a man who cried easily. He had not cried when his father's trucking business collapsed. He had not cried at his father's funeral 3 years ago, though the grief had lived in him for months after, quiet and heavy. He had never needed tears to feel things. He just held them differently. He sat there in the early morning silence and felt the full weight of what he now knew. His wife was pregnant. The baby was not his, and she was letting him believe it was. He thought about calling his lawyer right then. He had used Russell Keegan twice before. Once for a contract dispute with a property management client, once when an employee filed a false workers' compensation claim. Russell was thorough, careful, and did not waste words. But Grant didn't call yet. He needed to know more before he moved. He needed to know who. He turned the phone back over. He opened a notes application. He typed 3 words. Find a source. Then he went to make coffee, because the day was starting and he still had a company to run. 3 weeks passed. Grant did not change his behavior. He came home at reasonable hours. He sat across from Camille at dinner. He responded to her messages during the day. He went with her to the second prenatal appointment and sat in the chair beside the exam table with the same composed expression he had worn at the first. He was patient. He had learned patience the hard way, from watching his father lose everything because he moved too fast on instinct and not fast enough on evidence. Grant's father, Douglas Whitaker, had spent 22 years building a regional trucking operation out of Colorado Springs. He had 3 depots, 14 drivers, and contracts with 3 distribution companies. He was the kind of man who shook your hand once and meant it forever. His business partner of 11 years had forged his signature on a refinancing document. By the time Douglas realized what had happened, the debt had been restructured in a way that stripped him of 2 depots and gutted his primary contract. The legal fight that followed lasted 3 years and cost more than the assets were worth. Douglas won a partial settlement. He lost the business anyway. Grant had been 26 when it happened. He watched his father sit at his kitchen table every evening for a year, papers spread in front of him, going over documents he had trusted without reading closely enough. He watched a proud man learn too late what betrayal looked like when you weren't watching for it. Grant had never forgotten. So he watched. He waited. He let Camille feel safe. And then, on a Tuesday evening in late October, she handed him the answer without meaning to. It was just before 9. Camille had gone to shower before bed, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Grant was cleaning up after dinner, wiping down the granite, moving slowly and without urgency. The phone lit up. He didn't move toward it. He just looked. The screen showed name. Logan Pierce. Grant stopped wiping. He knew that name. Logan Pierce had worked for Grant's company for almost 2 years as a sales manager. He was good at the job on the surface, confident with clients, quick to close, always dressed well for meetings. But there had been something underneath that Grant had never fully trusted, a looseness in his ethics that showed up in small ways. He padded expense reports by amounts small enough to argue about. He overpromised timelines to clients and left the technicians to manage the fallout. He was the kind of man who performed loyalty without actually practicing it. 6 months ago, Logan had resigned. He gave 2 weeks' notice, shook hands with everyone, and said he had a new opportunity. Grant had wished him well and meant it sincerely. He had also felt a quiet sense of relief. Now Logan Pierce's name was on Camille's phone at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Grant picked up the phone. The message read, "Did you tell him yet?" He stood very still. His thumb moved across the screen. He had watched Camille unlock it enough times to know her passcode. 4 digits pressed in a fast diagonal. He entered them. The phone opened. He went to the messages. There were hundreds of them, some going back almost a year. He didn't read them in order. He scrolled through, reading blocks at a time, letting the picture form the way you assemble the machine from its parts, piece by piece until the whole mechanism became clear. They had been together for at least 10 months. That part wasn't a surprise anymore. But the rest of it was something else entirely. Grant read a message from Camille dated 4 months back. He doesn't suspect anything. He still thinks it's real. Just keep low until I give the word. Logan's reply. How long before you pull the trigger? Camille, after the baby comes. Once the court sees me with a child, the settlement will be massive. Half the company, plus child support for 18 years. Logan, and the house. Camille, we sell it. Split the proceeds. Then we move to Arizona and start clean. Grant read the exchange twice. He set the phone back on the counter exactly where it had been. He adjusted the angle slightly so it matched the position it had been in before he picked it up. He finished wiping the counter. He rinsed the cloth. He folded it over the edge of the sink. Then he walked to the living room and sat in his chair by the window. Outside, the lake was black under a cloudy sky. He sat there without moving until he heard the shower turn off. When Camille came down in a robe, hair damp, she found him watching a sports program on television with a glass of water on the end table beside him. Coming to bed soon? She asked. Another 20 minutes, he said. She kissed the top of his head and went upstairs. Grant waited until the bedroom light went off. Then he went to his office, closed the door quietly, and began making notes. He called Russell Keegan at 7 the next morning. Russell picked up on the second ring. He was that kind of lawyer, the kind who kept his phone charged and his mind sharp regardless of the hour. He had handled 3 of Grant's legal matters over the past 6 years, and each time Grant had come away with the same impression. Russell Keegan was not a man who believed in winning through luck or emotion. He believed in preparation. Grant, Russell said. What's happening? I need to come in, Grant said. Not today. I have 2 site visits. Tomorrow morning. Before 8 if you can. I can do 7:30. Good. He didn't explain on the phone. Not because he didn't trust Russell, but because some conversations needed to happen face-to-face with the door closed and the phones in your pocket. That day, Grant worked his full schedule. He visited a commercial site in Lakewood where his crew was doing a system overhaul for a mid-size office building. He checked the diagnostic reports, approved a parts order, and had lunch with his operations manager at a sandwich shop near the site. In the afternoon, he drove to a residential callback in Arvada where a unit had been running loud. He diagnosed it himself, a loose blower wheel, and fixed it in 40 minutes. He was thorough and present at every stop. But in the quiet spaces between jobs, he was building a list. He had already taken screenshots of the key messages on Camille's phone the night before, using his own phone to photograph the screen. He had a medical report confirming his sterility. He had the prenatal test results from Dr. Foster's office. And he realized something else. His accountant had flagged something 3 months ago. A transfer from one of their joint accounts, a moderate amount, moved to an account Grant didn't recognize. He had asked Camille about it at the time, and she said it was a payment for a home renovation consultation she had arranged as a surprise. He had accepted that without pushing. Now he understood what it actually was. She had been moving money. He spent that evening quietly, after dinner, reviewing his personal financial records. He had always kept detailed files, old habit from the early years when every dollar needed to be tracked and explained. He went through the past 14 months and found 4 separate transfers out of their joint account that he had either overlooked or accepted weak explanations for. The total was not enormous. Not yet, but it was deliberate. Small enough not to trigger alarm. Large enough to accumulate. She was building her own reserve. He photographed every relevant document. He organized the files into a folder on an encrypted drive he kept locked in the false bottom of a storage box in his office. At 7:20 the next morning, He sat across from Russell Keegan in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Denver. The city was still gray with early light. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table between them. Grant laid out everything in sequence. He spoke without emotion and without hurry. He presented the DNA results first, then the fertility confirmation, then the screenshots, then the financial transfers. Russell listened without interrupting. When Grant finished, Russell picked up the DNA report and read it carefully. Then he set it down and said, "She planned this very carefully." Grant picked up his coffee. "So will I." Russell leaned back. "The DNA result is your strongest card. It establishes that the child is not yours, which removes any assumption of paternity. The financial transfers are the second layer. They demonstrate intent to move marital assets before filing. The messages are the third layer, and they're significant because they show premeditated coordination. Is it enough? It's more than enough to prevent her from getting half the company, Russell said. The question is how we structure the filing and what we go after. If Logan Pierce knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud you of marital assets, there's exposure for him as well." Grant nodded. "I want that explored." "Understood." Russell wrote something on his notepad. "In the meantime, don't change your behavior. Don't move money, don't close accounts, don't say anything that signals awareness. If she thinks she's still in control, she won't prepare." "She won't be expecting this from me," Grant said. He said it without arrogance, just as a statement of fact. He knew how people read him. They saw the quiet exterior and made assumptions about what was underneath. That was their miscalculation. "One more thing," Grant said. Russell looked up. "I need to know that when this is over, the business is entirely mine. Every contract, every asset, every vehicle in the fleet. I didn't build that company for someone to use it as a settlement figure." Russell held his gaze. "That's exactly what we're going to make sure of." Grant picked up his coffee again and finished it. "Then let's get started." 5 weeks after the meeting with Russell, Camille was 20 weeks along. The pregnancy was showing now, a visible change that had shifted the atmosphere in the house. Camille received more attention from people around her. Friends visited. Her mother came to stay for a long weekend. The house felt fuller. Grant moved through all of it with steady politeness. He brought home flowers once. He assembled a piece of nursery furniture that Camille had ordered. He sat through a dinner with Camille's mother and answered questions about the business with measured patience. He was the image of a content man preparing for fatherhood, and Russell Keegan was quietly preparing something else entirely. They met twice more in that period, once to review Grant's compiled financial evidence, once to discuss the structure of the paternity challenge. Russell had connections with a medical genetics firm that handled prenatal DNA cases, discreet, court-admissible, and fast. A prenatal paternity test, Russell explained at their second meeting, can be done through cell-free fetal DNA in the mother's blood. Non-invasive, 100% accurate, and fully admissible in family court. Does Camille have to agree? The test requires a blood draw from her and a sample from you, or from the alleged biological father, if available. For our purposes, we request it under the standard grounds of disputed paternity. She'll push back, Grant said. Let her. Grant raised the test directly on a Sunday afternoon. Camille was at the kitchen island, looking through a baby registry she had started. Grant came in from the garage, washed his hands at the sink, and leaned against the counter. I've been thinking, he said. I'd like to do a prenatal DNA test. The change in the room was immediate. Camille looked up from the registry. Something passed through her eyes, fast, controlled, but visible to anyone watching closely. Why? Her voice stayed even. Paternity confirmation, Grant said. Standard thing for the legal record. Insurance companies are starting to require it for coverage purposes. She set down the registry sheet. You don't trust me, she said. He recognized the move, turning the conversation toward emotion, making it about hurt feelings rather than the request itself. He didn't take the bait. If the baby is mine, he said, the test confirms it. Nothing changes. It's a simple procedure. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her calculating. The test, she likely reasoned, would only show what she believed, that the pregnancy was legally his because it happened within the marriage. She probably didn't realize that a prenatal DNA test went further than legal assumption, that it tested actual biological paternity. She exhaled through her nose. Fine, she said, if it's that important to you. The test was arranged through Russell's contact at the genetics lab. A nurse came to the house under the guise of a routine prenatal home visit, a service Camille had signed up for through the clinic. The blood draw took 5 minutes. Grant had already provided his samples separately. The results took 12 days. Russell called Grant at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. The lab results are in. Can you come to the office? Grant was at his company's main yard, reviewing a vehicle maintenance report with his fleet manager. He handed the report back. Go ahead and schedule the service on units 4 and 6, he said. I'll be back before noon. He drove to Denver without turning on the radio. He sat in Russell's conference room. Russell laid the lab report on the table in front of him without preface. Grant read the summary line. Probability of paternity for the tested individual, 0%. He looked at the number for a moment. 0.00. He placed the report back on the table. He thought of Camille at the kitchen island planning a nursery. He thought of Logan Pierce's message. Then we moved to Arizona and start clean. He thought of his father at the kitchen table in Colorado Springs, going over documents he should have read more carefully. Then he straightened in his chair and looked at Russell. Now, he said quietly, we finish this. Russell opened a fresh legal pad. I'll begin drafting the filing today. Grant nodded once. He drove back to his company yard and finished the afternoon as if it were any other day. Because to him, it almost was. He had known this moment was coming since that first morning in the home office. The test hadn't revealed anything that surprised him. It had simply converted what he already knew into something a court could read. That evening, he came home to Camille making dinner. The kitchen smelled of olive oil and garlic. She was playing music on the small speaker above the refrigerator. She smiled when he walked in and asked if he was hungry. He said yes. He set his keys on the hook by the door. He sat at the kitchen table and waited. 2 weeks, he thought. Just 2 more weeks. The filing happened on a Thursday morning. Grant arrived at the Jefferson County Courthouse at 8:45 with Russell Keegan walking beside him. They passed through the entrance quietly, found the family court clerk's office, and submitted the divorce petition along with a sealed exhibit package that ran to 87 pages. Inside that package was everything. The DNA paternity test result, certified by the genetics lab and reviewed by an independent physician. The fertility report from the Capitol Hill Clinic, confirming Grant's azoospermia. The financial records tracking 4 transfers from marital accounts into an account registered under Camille's maiden name. And the screenshots, time-stamped, authenticated by a digital forensics consultant Russell had brought in, showing the full extent of the communications between Camille and Logan Pierce. The petition alleged adultery. It alleged financial concealment of marital assets. It alleged coordinated fraud with intent to establish false paternity as the basis for child support and a company settlement. The filing was sealed until process service was completed. A process server delivered the documents to the house near Pinewood Lake that same afternoon at 2:17. Grant was at a job site in Golden when his phone buzzed with a text from Russell. Served. He pocketed the phone and went back to supervising the ductwork installation. He had thought carefully about how he would feel in this moment. He expected something, anger maybe, satisfaction, a particular kind of relief. What he felt instead was just clarity. The same clarity that came after you diagnosed a difficult equipment failure. Not happiness exactly, but the clean, functional satisfaction of understanding what went wrong and how to fix it. Camille called him 4 minutes after the server left. Grant looked at the screen. He let it ring through to voicemail. She called again. He let that one go too. She sent a text. He read it. What is this? Call me right now. He put the phone back in his pocket. When he arrived home that evening, her car was in the driveway. He could see through the front window that the lights were all on. He sat in his truck for a moment, gathered himself, and went inside. She was in the living room. The papers were spread on the coffee table. Her eyes were red. She had clearly been crying, but the expression on her face when he walked in was not grief. It was fury. You had me served? She said. That's the standard process, Grant said. He set his jacket over the back of a chair and sat down. You didn't say anything. You didn't even, Grant, I'm pregnant. You had a process server show up at our house. Camille, he said calmly. She stopped. Something in his voice. The complete absence of emotion in it. Not coldness, just an absolute stillness that didn't invite argument. I know about Logan, he said. The color left her face. I know how long, he said. I know what you planned. And I know the baby is his. The silence in the room was total. Even the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen seemed to pull back. She opened her mouth. He held up one hand, gently. Don't, he said. There's a DNA result in those papers. And a fertility report confirming I can't father children. So whatever you're about to say, understand that everything you say from this point on is going in front of a judge. She sat down on the couch. He watched her calculate. He could see it happening behind her eyes, the rapid reassessment of what she had control over, what she could contest, what the damages might look like. He didn't feel sorry for her. He felt nothing except the solid ground of knowing exactly where he stood. My lawyer will be in touch with yours, he said. Until the proceedings are concluded, I'll be sleeping in the guest room. The house arrangement stays as is. He stood, picked up his jacket, and walked to the staircase. Grant, he paused with one hand on the banister. He turned his head, not his body. She was looking at him with something that might have been, in another context, actual remorse. I never meant for it to. Camille, he said. He kept his voice level. I know exactly what you meant. He went upstairs. The hearing in Jefferson County Family Court came 3 months later, in mid-February. The courtroom was a standard room, wood paneling, gallery benches, the state seal above the judge's bench. It was smaller than people imagined when they heard the word courtroom. The gallery had about 30 people in it, mostly observers and a few members of the press who had picked up on the case through the public filing. Grant sat at the petitioner's table with Russell beside him. He wore a dark gray suit he had bought specifically for the occasion. Not expensive in a showy way, but well-fitted and serious. He kept his hands folded in front of him on the table. He did not look at the gallery. Camille sat at the respondent's table with her attorney, a man named Davies who had a reputation for aggressive representation in high-value divorces. Davies was known for finding emotional angles, building sympathy portraits of women in difficult marriages, surfacing old grievances, turning a financial case into a character case. Grant had been warned about this. She's going to make you look like the problem, Russell had told him during their preparation session. Distant, controlling, emotionally unavailable. It's the oldest play in the book. The goal is to get the judge to see her as a victim, so the asset division shifts in her favor. Let her, Grant had said. He had been saying that a lot lately. Davies opened the respondent's argument by painting Camille as a woman who had given years of her life to a marriage in which she felt unseen. He described her as someone who had abandoned her own career to support a husband whose company consumed him. He spoke about the emotional distance, the long hours, the way Grant had prioritized work over partnership. He did not mention Logan Pierce by name in his opening. He called him a person my client turned to in a moment of vulnerability. Grant listened to all of it without changing his expression. He had heard all of it before. Camille had been testing versions of this story with her friends for months. He had seen traces of it in her social media activity and heard fragments of it through people they both knew. He had not responded to any of it. He had let her build the narrative undisturbed. Because narratives built on weak foundations collapsed the moment the evidence appeared. Russell stood when it was time. He didn't open with an argument. He opened with a document. He requested the court's permission to display the message exchange on the courtroom screen. The judge granted it. The bailiff connected the display. The first message appeared. Camille's words, in her font, with her contact name attached. Once the baby arrives, the court will believe it's his. I'll get half the company and child support. The room shifted. Grant felt it without looking. A change in the quality of the air. The next message. Logan's reply. Then we sell the house and move to Arizona. Easy money. Then the financial transfer records. For transactions, dates, and amounts highlighted. The account number traced to Camille's maiden name. Then the DNA report projected in full on the screen. Probability of paternity for the tested individual, 0%. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Elaine Mercer. She had been on the family court bench for 17 years. She read documents the way surgeons read imaging, calmly, thoroughly, without reaction, absorbing everything before drawing a conclusion. Davies tried. He argued that the messages were taken out of context. He argued that Camille had acted out of fear, not calculation. He argued that the financial transfers were personal savings, not concealment. Judge Mercer looked at Davies over the rims of her glasses. "Counselor," she said, "I've reviewed the financial records, the DNA report, and the communication history. The pattern is consistent and documented. I'd encourage you to focus your argument on what can actually be contested." Davies pivoted. He argued that Logan Pierce had no formal financial relationship with Camille, so the charge of coordinated fraud was overstated. Russell responded by entering into evidence 3 emails in which Logan had directly discussed the projected settlement figure and the timeline for Camille's filing. He had been advising on strategy. He had known the child was his. He had participated in the plan actively. The judge wrote something on her notepad. Camille testified in the afternoon. She wore a dark blue dress. She kept her hands folded in her lap on the witness stand. She spoke softly and carefully. She talked about feeling lonely in the marriage. She talked about the pressure of having nothing of her own. She talked about Logan as someone she had turned to when she was struggling. She never said she was sorry. She said she had made mistakes. Grant watched her from the table and felt something that was not quite sympathy and not quite contempt. It was closer to recognition. She was still performing. Even here, even now, she was managing the optics. Russell's cross-examination was brief and precise. He asked her to confirm the date she had first contacted Logan Pierce outside of a professional context. She couldn't remember exactly. He showed her a message dated 11 months ago. Her response to Logan: "This is going to work. He trusts me completely." He asked her to confirm whether the account receiving the transferred funds was registered under her name. She confirmed it was. He asked her whether she had informed Grant of the transfers at the time they were made. She said she hadn't. He sat down. Grant thought about his father again, briefly. He thought about that kitchen table, those documents, that long, expensive legal fight. He thought about how betrayal had cost Douglas Whitaker years and everything he had built. Then he thought about something else. He thought about the day he had decided, alone in his office at 6 a.m. with a medical report in his hand, that he was going to do this right. No blow-up, no accusation, no emotional confrontation that gave her time to prepare. Just evidence, just patience, just the truth, documented and irrefutable, presented in the correct order in front of the correct person. The hearing concluded at 4:45. Judge Mercer scheduled her ruling for 2 weeks later. Grant shook Russell's hand in the corridor. "How does it look?" Grant asked. "As good as any case I've brought into this room," Russell said. Grant nodded. He walked to the parking structure, got in his truck, and drove home. The ruling came on a Tuesday. Grant sat in Russell's office and listened as his lawyer read the key sections of Judge Mercer's decision aloud. The court finds clear and convincing evidence that the respondent engaged in deliberate financial concealment of marital assets prior to the filing of dissolution proceedings. The court further finds that the respondent misrepresented the paternity of the child she carried, a misrepresentation that, if uncontested, would have resulted in the petitioner bearing financial obligations, including child support, for a child not biologically related to him. In light of these findings, the court denies the respondent's claim to equitable division of the petitioner's business interests. The court determines that Whitaker Climate Solutions remains the sole property of the petitioner. Russell continued reading. The respondent is awarded a base settlement of $42,000, representing a portion of the joint household savings accumulated during the marriage. The respondent receives no share of the business, no interest in the lake house property, and no claim to child support from the petitioner, as biological paternity has been conclusively disproved. Grant listened to all of it. When Russell finished, he set the document on the desk and looked at Grant. "The lake house is yours," Russell said. "The company is yours. The settlement she's receiving is modest by any calculation, certainly nothing close to what she was planning." Grant said nothing for a moment. He thought about the night he had sat at the kitchen table in the dark after coming home from the doctor's office. He thought about the early morning with the phone and the lab results. He thought about months of holding everything in, moving through his days as if the ground beneath him were solid, even when it wasn't. "Logan?" Grant asked. "He's been named as a correspondent in the fraud component," Russell said. "The judge's findings open the door to a civil suit if you want to pursue it." "That's your call." Grant thought about it for a long moment. He thought about Logan Pierce, the easy confidence, the expense reports padded by careful small amounts, the handshake on his last day with a company he was already helping to scheme against. "Not right now," Grant said. "The judgment is public record. Let that do the work." Russell nodded slowly. "It already has," he said. "I heard from a contact that 2 companies Logan had interviewed with pulled their offers after the court documents were filed publicly. His name is attached to a fraud finding now. That follows a person." Grant picked up the ruling document and read the key line again himself. "The petitioner's business interests remain wholly with the petitioner." He set it down. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. "Send me the final invoice," he said to Russell. "And thank you for all of it." Russell shook his hand. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just organized the evidence." Grant walked out of the building into the cold February air. The mountains were visible to the west, pale and white-capped against the gray sky. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in his pockets, just breathing. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel victorious in the way people imagined victory. He felt the way he felt after completing a difficult diagnostic job. The specific, grounded satisfaction of having done the work correctly, of having solved the problem without making it worse. The drive back to Cedar Ridge took just under an hour. He went past the office to check on his operations manager, reviewed an equipment order, signed off on 2 invoices, and had a cup of coffee with his dispatcher, a woman named Paulette who had been with the company for 6 years and kept the scheduling running like a Swiss clock. "You look better," Paulette said, studying him over a coffee mug. "Getting there," he said. She nodded and went back to her schedule. As for Camille, her relationship with Logan did not survive the loss of the money. Grant heard about it through a mutual acquaintance 3 weeks after the ruling. Logan had moved out of the apartment they had been sharing since Camille left the lake house. Without the settlement, without the company's stake, without the financial cushion they had been counting on, the relationship had nothing left to hold it together. Logan left. Camille went to stay with her mother in Fort Collins. The grand plan, the Arizona relocation, the clean start on someone else's money, had dissolved entirely. Grant did not feel satisfaction when he heard this, or at least not the sharp satisfaction he had expected when he had first read their messages. By the time their plan fell apart, he had already moved past most of it. What he felt was something simpler. Confirmation. Spring came late to Cedar Ridge that year. The lake was still half frozen in early March, the surface a pale pewter gray in the mornings, shifting to blue-green by midday when the sun cleared the ridge. Geese came through in formation and were gone again within a day. The trees along the bank were still bare, but showing the first faint color at their tips, the particular shade of almost green that meant the ground had decided to try again. Grant sat on the wooden deck behind the lake house on a Saturday morning in mid-April. He had a coffee in his hand, steam rising in the cool air. His boots were still damp from a short walk along the bank he had taken before sunrise. The deck needed restaining. He had noticed it a week ago, the weathering that came from 3 Colorado winters, the surface going rough in spots where the finish had worn through. He had made a mental note to handle himself this summer. He liked doing things like that. Physical work that produced a visible result. The divorce had been finalized in March. All the documents were filed, all the accounts were separated, all the legal threads that had bound him to a version of his life that turned out to be constructed on deliberate dishonesty. All of it was resolved. His business was doing well. He had brought on 2 new commercial accounts in January, before the court proceedings were over. The company's operations manager had stepped into a more senior role without Grant needing to push for it, which told him the structure was maturing the way he had hoped. They were bidding on a municipal contract that would be the largest in the company's history. Grant sat on the deck and watched the lake. He was not at peace in the way the word was sometimes used, as if peace were an absence of something. He was alert. He was thinking. He was planning the next quarter and considering whether to bring on a third technician for the eastern route. But the noise was gone. The particular noise that came from living inside a lie someone else was telling. The background static of something being wrong that you couldn't quite name. It was gone. The house was quiet in the right way now. The rooms felt like his. He thought about Camille, briefly and without malice. He thought about the version of her he had met at that birthday gathering in Aurora. The confident woman with a wine glass who said she admired people who worked hard. He wondered which version of her had been real and which had been the performance. He suspected the answer was complicated in a way he would never fully know and had no interest in chasing. He thought about Logan Pierce for a shorter moment. Then he let both of them go. He thought instead about his father. He thought about Douglas Whitaker at the kitchen table, going over paperwork he should have read more carefully. He thought about the phone calls those last few years, his father's voice careful and measured, never complaining, just navigating. He had died with his pride intact, even if not much else. Grant respected that. He wished his father had lived to see the business reach what it had reached. He thought maybe his father would have said something like, "You built something real, Grant. Make sure nobody walks off with it." He had made sure. The sun was fully up now, clearing the ridge line and spreading across the lake in a long, bright path. The water caught it and threw it back in pieces. A bird he couldn't name moved through the trees along the far bank, its call carrying cleanly across the water in the cool morning air. Grant took a long drink of his coffee. He thought about the day in Dr. Foster's exam room, when the word congratulations had landed on him like something thrown from a great height. He thought about the drive to Denver and the man at the clinic and the clean, precise language of the lab report. He thought about the night he had stood at the kitchen counter with Camille's phone in his hand, reading words she had written for someone else, words that revealed the full shape of a plan she had been building for almost a year. He thought about sitting across from Russell Keegan and saying, "So will I." He had meant it then, and he had followed through. Grant set his coffee mug on the arm of his chair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the lake. The water was still. The morning was quiet. The house behind him was his. He had spent 8 years building a life. The company, the house, the sense of solid ground beneath him. He had worked before sunrise and after dark. He had made decisions no one else wanted to make and fixed problems no one else had bothered to trace to their source. He had done all of it without asking for praise, because the work itself was enough. Someone had looked at what he'd built and decided it was easier to take than earn. They had thought his steadiness was passivity. They had thought his silence was ignorance. They had looked at a man who moved calmly through the world and concluded that calm men were easy targets. Grant stood from his chair. He picked up the empty coffee mug. He turned and looked back at the house, the porch, the window of the home office where he had sat alone at 6 in the morning with a lab result and a decision to make, the spare room where his company records were organized in labeled binders that told the story of every year he had spent building something worth keeping. He said it quietly, the way a man said something true and finished. Not for anyone else, not for effect, just because it needed to be said. They thought I was the easiest man to fool. He walked back inside. The deck needed restaining. He already knew what kind of stain he would use. He had a list.